In the course of your life, you have had some exceptional experiences that will remain unforgettable for you. To start with, in 1998, you had an out-of-body experience. Would you tell me how that came about? Yes, this happened during my studies. I was about to finish my studies, and there were a lot of exams to be taken and work to be done. Well, there were a lot of things to deal with, so I was studying day and night, surrounded by books, and during that time, I took very little care of myself. I overworked my body, I ate badly, and I didn't sleep. And moreover, there was the stress due to the exam, and this was the state exam that was slowly approaching over the horizon. This took quite a lot of energy, and one afternoon, I was poring over the books again, and in doing so, I got very tired, and I thought that I would lie down for a short time, maybe 10 minutes, and at that time, I was living in a one-room studio. The bed, the desk, and as well the wardrobe, and everything was in one room. So I lay down and fell asleep. But after a while, I woke up again as if I had heard a babble of voices. It wasn't a language I understood, so it wasn't German or anything like that, but I clearly perceived it as a babble of voices. And on top of all, I still had the impression, even the physical sensation, of someone who was nudging the side of my arm right here, as if someone wanted to say, wake up, or something like that. And the odd thing was that I couldn't turn my head to see who it was, but it wasn't my physical head because I was asleep. Anyway, I couldn't turn toward what was happening. And the next thing I do remember is that I went very slightly into a sitting up position, then moving toward the end of the bed, where I then went through the wall and where I saw outside a kind of spiral staircase. And then I found myself in this spiral staircase, and only then I realized, oh my goodness, now something has happened that I have no influence on. Now I've landed somewhere where the physical laws I know no longer apply. And on top of that, the people who were living in the house with me had gone on holiday, so I couldn't even call anyone for help. And then I saw a presence next to me, although I didn't really see it, but I sensed that there was someone or something asking me a question, even though not in words. And my response to this question was, if I am allowed to go back again, I'll then make sure that I treat myself more lovingly. And hardly was this thought through to the end that I felt myself sliding back, whoosh, into my body, almost at the speed of light, almost painfully. Whereupon I opened my eyes, and then I thought, oh my goodness, what was it that happened here? I also had heart palpitations, and I was quite agitated. Well, it was only later that I read a lot about it, and I asked people and a psychologist about this topic, and it wasn't until about a year later that I had come across the word out-of-body experience, and this for the first time. So I then thought, oh, that might have been something like that. But what is still somehow touching for me was the shelteredness that was bestowed upon me in my experience. I think the whole purpose of this experience was for me to realize that I also have limits, that my powers are limited, and that I must or may be careful with my powers. Sometime later, Sonja, you had another out-of-body experience, which was even confirmed by a second person. Yes, that wasn't long after, maybe about a year later, At that time, I was with my husband, who was living in America. I was still very busy with my studies in Zurich, and we made, between us, several round trips to visit each other each year. And this was still at a time when you could afford the plane tickets. Well, in that summer, I spent 3 weeks with my husband in San Diego. We had an absolutely lovely time, and at some point it was time for me to fly back home. And I knew that I would definitely not be able to travel to see him for another whole year, because the state exam and all the associated tests were approaching. And that's why I couldn't stay away so easily, you see. And while on the plane, I became overwhelmed with sadness. And I can even remember sitting there in my seat and that the tears were just streaming down my face, and there was nothing I could do about it. My eyes just simply filled with tears, sliding down, taking their path. They were just simply running down my cheeks. The second feeling was love, and this was a love whose quality I can hardly describe. It was greater than what I have ever experienced in my life before. And in between those two feelings of sadness and love, as well as due to this intense wish, I just want to go back and see him one more time. So I fell asleep from sheer grief, feeling like the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane, who no longer knew how to go on due to sheer grief, and then simply were carried away by sleep. And during the time that I had been dozing off, I had an experience where I was actually standing in my husband's doorway, looking at him. Then the plane started to land, and I was back in the here and now, and I awakened. Thereupon, I got on the next plane and flew home. Once home, then I had almost forgotten this experience. I then called him, "Hi, I'm home. Everything went very well," and so on and so on. Whereupon he said, and here I have to anticipate that he is a scientist and therefore not a person who is seeking such experiences. So he said, "Listen, something really strange happened last evening. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw you standing in the doorway looking at me." At that moment, I remembered it, and I said to him, "You won't believe it, but I had kind of a dream, an experience, just before the plane landed in Atlanta." We then compared the time and found out that this experience happened at the same time. And this so touched me. And what really touched me most about this experience was that somehow the motor of all this, the activating energy, so to speak, was love. The fact that love can transcend space and time and reconnect two people vibrating at roughly the same frequency is still touching me. Fast forward to July 2017, you had an exceptional experience where you perceived the spiritual influence of a guarding spirit. Yes, it was a very nice summer day. It was very dry. I was driving someone to the train station, and on the way back, the conversation we had went through my mind once again. And while I was driving as usual on the route that I knew inside and out, I had a daydream, not noticing how I ended up with the car in the opposite lane. I was sitting only on one side of my backside, and there was a curve in front of me. And in that moment, I saw a kind of fog bank in front of me. And inside the fog bank, well, it happened all at the same time. So I somehow woke up from my daydream and my inner dialogue. Thereupon, I saw this bank of fog, and at the same moment, I also saw headlights coming toward me. All this happened in a wooded part of the route. And over here, the headlights, the lights on the car, had to be switched on. And in the fog, I saw the rays of the headlights. And then I realized that I was too far on the wrong lane, but I was able to correct this just in time. And at that very moment, the car that was coming from the opposite lane was driving around the curve. I hadn't even seen this car up to that point, and it was belting past me. So this experience had such a strange aftertaste. I said before that it was a very dry day. I still remember that when I was combing my hair or putting on a t-shirt or something similar, my hair stood up as if electrified. So where did this fog come from? With all this dryness, where does the fog come from? And the whole thing seemed so strange to me that right after that, I had to pull over to the extreme right-hand side of the road, also because my heart was pounding so hard. Then I got out. I walked back a bit. Do you believe it? There was no fog. There was just nothing. And today I understand it as something having manifested itself as fog in order to warn me. Because without this phenomena, I would not have seen these headlights. Because the whole thing happened at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So you then got the impression that it was all influenced by the other world in order to save you from an accident. Yes, that's indeed what I thought back then, and I still think so today. At that time, I was a bit more awake, so to speak, so I at least used to see such experiences within the realm of possibility. I also believe that we all have guardian angels, and I think it was my guardian angel who was somehow manifesting himself that way. But ultimately, it was teamwork, because I was the one who finally had to see these headlights, and then I had to course correct. No one took me sitting in the car and pushed me together with the car to the other side of the road. It was teamwork. I was shown something, and I was able to react to it, thus avoiding something bad. So later on, you had still another experience where you almost physically felt the presence of the world beyond. Yes, and this was an experience, Franz, that I will never forget until my last day. It was also in the same year, 2017, in April. It was in the evening, and I had already prepared for bed. Then I was lying on the bed for a little while, thinking about God and the world, also thinking about a topic. Well, here's the backstory, which is important in order to, well, maybe it makes more sense, indeed, if I tell you the backstory as well. I had been thinking about the topic of forgiveness and whether we, the living, can forgive people who have already passed on. Also, whether the forgiveness reaches these people, that in this case practically comes to hindsight. And there's a second thought. John O'Donohue, an Irish poet, once said that time and space do not exist in the hereafter, and that those people who have already left can still bless us from there. This procedure is based on a mutual exchange of giving and accepting, so to speak, and that's because I can express or think or feel my forgiveness. And this then reaches the ones over there, whereas wherever over there is. This was the circle of thoughts, the circle of ideas. And I was lying on my bed, and thereupon I had a kind of sudden insight that made me think, well, I can always forgive if it is possible for me, although there may also be situations where I cannot grant forgiveness yet, because I still have to come to terms with it myself before I do so. And this thought then was boiling down to what Jesus himself said: forgive your enemies and pray for those who wish you ill, and so on. And so my thoughts kept dealing with the big theme of forgiveness. But I was somehow dozing off again, whereby I then had a dream, a quite normal dream, a kind of garden variety dream. And I came out of this dream again, a bit more into consciousness, but this was neither a really sleeping nor a really waking state. And in this, well, I don't know how to call it. It's a beautiful floating state. And then I physically felt how on the right side and on the left side, but a little more to the right side, the mattress felt as if it was being depressed, as if someone had propped their arm on it or was sitting there. I had my physical eyes closed, but my inner eyes were wide open, and I know how I perceived this presence without knowing who it was or what it was. But one thing was for sure, it was good. It was absolutely good. And I still remember stretching out my hands and someone or something then taking those hands. And I hardly can describe what that feeling was. This vitality, how I could, so to speak, dip my hands into it. But this vitality wasn't a neutral vitality, something that is just simply there and from which one can take a little or nothing at all. But rather, what was meant by this was I myself, and it was love that was flowing, and it was life that was flowing. I started from my hands, through the arms, and then through the whole body. I felt this flowing, comparable to the phone being recharged when it has run out of battery. And about in this way, I received a thrust of power, as if a voice said, yes, you are meant, you are on the right path. And strangely enough, I also felt a rush of gratitude, not only coming from me, but also from me, but I too was shown gratitude. And as for me, I wanted to wake up. I wanted to see who it was. But of course, I hadn't thought that far, that when I opened my physical eyes, there wouldn't be anything there, because this was really an unknown kind of experience. So I then forced myself, as I said, to wake up and look around. And I found myself lying in bed with my arms outstretched and a smile on my face. This feeling lasted for about a quarter of an hour. I can't say exactly, anyway, for a while, shall we say, and I noticed that the more day consciousness came back, and I came back into my physical self, it all just disappeared. Afterwards, however, I felt a sense of loss, and I thought, oh, where is it all? Where is it now? I would just so love to experience this again. So who do you think that might have been? Well, I'm thinking of 3 variants of explanatory models, and I can't tell you which of the 3 I would find to be the most beautiful, because all 3 hypotheses are quite beautiful, each in its own way. The first hypothesis is actually that in fact my guardian angel sat down next to me, holding my hand, and this was a gift to me. The second hypothesis is that God himself, or maybe Jesus, yes, indeed, Jesus, why not, wanted to make it clear to me you were on the right path, because forgiveness is a topic that matters, and it's definitely worth being pursued consistently. The third hypothesis is my question. Which being supposed that the person I was forgiving might very well be my father, if he had indeed gotten the opportunity to thank me in this way? Well, I'm telling you this here. You may notice that I'm trying to find the appropriate words, so that I probably do best explaining it by means of a picture. It's like having a wonderfully cooked meal from a 5-star chef that I would like to tell you about. But instead of telling, I tear the page out of the cookbook and give it to you. And that's exactly the difference between the physical possibilities and this mental, spiritual experiencing. The physical possibilities ultimately entailing what is so thin and dry coming out of my mouth, and what remains for you is only to pass it on to the others that way, but it is something inexact. Sonja, what impact did these various exceptional experiences have on your worldview? Well, they had an ambivalent impact. May I first start with the difficult aspect? It was especially difficult for me, especially after the last experience that took place on a very physical level. I was getting back into coarse reality, and even now I'm still struggling with it. Our 3D world in which we are moving here seems so heavy to me, and quite apart from this fact, you are just having an experience that is exceptional, and therefore you know how it could alternatively be. But you're coming back again, and you're a pedestrian, so to speak. This experience is also reinforcing the feeling that I have known since childhood, namely that I always used to feel very alien in this world. And when I realized, still being quite young, maybe 6 or 7 years old, that we kill animals so that we can have meat, well, this seems like a sacrilege against animals to me. Well, I too was eating meat before, and even now I'm not a vegetarian either. But I remember when something broke into my little perfect child's worth that sometimes I'm still struggling with today. And I often think to myself, what a strange place we have ended up in here. We are scraping our knees and stumbling through life, staggering forward, and somehow, once in a while, we are achieving knowledge about something, or we have an inspiration. And this then is indeed refreshing, giving us a new lease on life. But unfortunately, that's not the normal experience. The normal experience is that you have to wash the car, you have to pay taxes, you have to worry about this, and then you have to worry about some trifles. That's it. And these exceptional experiences that I had have shown me once again, how shall I put it, that I so love this world. I find it very beautiful, but it also has something rough, something uncouth. Well, this was one aspect. On the other hand, however, these experiences seem to me like candles that have been lit and placed on my life's path. And when I now look back on my past, on my life, then I see a whole series of candles. Here is one, there is one, then there is still yet another candle, and it all makes a shining path. And there is not a single reason in this dear world that says there won't be any more candles in the future, because it is these very experiences that embed me in a superior world experience. And this is something that is incredibly comforting. Sonja, you do believe in life after death, absolutely without question. I thank you so very much for the interview, and I thank you, Franz,